welcome everyone. Welcome. This is the Conscious Chicano. We're on to Conscious Chat number 28, and the topic is the Jesus Revolution film. Um, Matter of fact, I should have titled it as review, but actually, I saw the film yesterday called Jesus Revolution. And usually I don't promote films, right? But this was actually a pretty good film. Go check it out. It's in theaters right now. It's called Jesus Revolution. So I'll be getting into that topic. It's very interesting. Um, so welcome to my channel, everyone. If you just came into YouTube and just check the details below, you can click on my Rumble account, subscribe, and like my videos there. I'm actually doing more videos now, uncensored videos, information that you can't talk about in the mainstream media here, especially Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. But I'm covering topics that are exposing a lot of corruption out here. um, and what else? Oh, and go to my Instagram. If you want to contact me, click on my Instagram accounts, send me a message. And if you want to, need some resources, or you just want to go more into depth on a topic, or if you even want to interview me, or if you want to be interviewed here as well, and click on my Twitter account. Make an account if you don't have one. Add me there too. There's a thing called Twitter Space, and I have uncensored conscious chats there as well. And you can listen in and even participate as well, and add on to the topic. And if you just came in, just, if you chat here, you know, just remember, just follow the rules. Just be respectful, civil, rational in some sense, and stick to the topic, and contribute to it. Anyways, let's get to the topic today. So yesterday I just saw the film Jesus Revolution, and wow, it was. I was surprised. I was surprised because sometimes I see Christian movies and they're a little cheesy, right? But this was pretty good, pretty interesting. So what was the film? How's it going? Casual conversation, definitely. Um, so if you just entered, I'm actually talking about a film that's out in theaters. It's called Jesus Revolution, and I actually just saw it yesterday. So it's kind of like a review on this movie, and so and I'll be talking about my involvement with the Calvary chapels as well. Um, I've been attending in the past Calvary chapels, and I've been kind of following some of the preachers back in the day, back in the '80s when I was a kid. So so Jesus Revolution, if you ever get a chance, go out and see that movie. It's very inspiring. It kind of talks about the history of how the Calvary Chapel churches got started. And if you guys don't know, about the Calvary Chapel churches, they're kind of they branched off kind of like from the charismatic movements. Um, and I know casual conversation. You're Catholic, so there was a famous lady named Catherine Coleman. She was into like a lot of healing ministry back in the day, like in the '70s, um, and she became real popular. Like a lot of miracles would happen, and there was people from different denominations. There was Protestants, Catholics, Pentecostals, Charismatics. even like mainline Protestants, Presbyterians, and all of them were just seeing the move of God, right? The supernatural power of God, the miracles and everything. And I've actually came across people who participated in Catherine Coleman's ministry. And one lady who was blind, she got healed and supernaturally, and now she can see. And to this very day, she's still involved in supernatural, kind of like the Pentecostal ministries and healing ministries. And she prays over people, and because she's been healed, she's a testimony of God's healing power. So she's still involved. There's another one that I know about. His name is Brother Mike, and he used to be involved in Catherine Coleman's ministries. So a lot of times you have these mainline Protestants criticizing the charismatic Pentecostal movement, and so there a lot of times this movie actually reveals that mentality that actually stops a lot of the movement at times. It's religion actually stops at times. It's like the move of God, like it's religion that tries to stop the supernatural ministries out here. And a lot of times it's influenced by this false theology called cessationist theology, where they believe that the miracles and prophecy and casting out demons and you know healing, all that supernatural stuff is like only in biblical times, only confined to Jesus and in the early apostles, and they no longer continue, right? That's actually a false theology, and I'm very critical of that cessationist theology. I never even knew it existed until I came across churches that actually believe in that. I actually got involved in the church. I actually believed in that. Me coming from a Pentecostal background, I got involved in a church like that, and they were just trying to restrict me. Like, oh, you can't be doing this, you can't be doing that. Oh, those supernatural gifts are, you know, they were only needed to establish the church, and it didn't continue on. And it's just trying to trying to limit God, and God has no limits. God works however He wants. All He wants is a willing vessel, someone who would actually listen to Him. So, but you see this in this film. It's very interesting. So the film goes into the history of how the Calvary chapels pretty much got established out here in California. I actually came across Calvary Chapel by just listening to them on Christian radio late at night. When I was a kid, I would listen to Christian radio, and I would hear this guy named Chuck Smith on there. And he was actually a pretty good preacher. I would listen, a lot of good teachings from there. And then I would see a guy sometimes named Greg Laurie on TBN, like the major TBN Christian channel. Um, and I was kind of attracted to like his ministry, because he was like, everyone was wearing like Hawaiian shirts. This was back in the 80s, and it looked kind of like, the congregation was kind of like these beach, surfer types. That was kind of like the thing back out here in the 80s, especially out there in Orange County and stuff. But I used to watch Greg Laurie, and he had a lot of good teachings as well. And then I would listen to a Mexican guy from Calvary Chapel. He would come on the radio. His name is Raul Reese, and Raul Reese, man, he had a Spanish accent, right? And I would just listen to him on the radio, and lots of good wisdom, a lot of good teachings there as well. So I definitely was, attracted to the whole Calvary Chapel ministries, and later on, like, got involved in going to Raul Reese's church, Golden Springs, and there's a lot of brown folks that attend his church, and I would, his ministry is it's pretty big and pretty good. He's doing good for his ministry, and and then I found out I started, actually I started attending his ministry, and then Raul Reese's ministry, and he would he had actually a big church, and there's like a cool bookstore. I would go down there and buy some really good books, theology books, and different books like that. And then he would, I would look at his schedule, and he was offering different programs in his church, even teaching martial arts. I was like, oh, shoot, martial arts. Because I have a history of martial arts, right? I've been into martial arts since I was a kid. And I never knew that Raul Reese, I looked into him, he has a martial art background. I was like, oh, he even has a testimony of, it's like a film that he has about his life, and even as a Christian and as a martial artist and everything. And it's just amazing testimony how God, changed his life, you know and he changed his life for to he came out of, he has his own testimony how he basically, like everyone else, everyone was, prior to being saved, we were lost, right? Lost in, in our, into this world and the worldly things out here. And he, gave his life to Christ, and now he leads a big old ministry. But I was kind of like attracted to that. I was like, man, this guy's into martial arts, and I actually found out that a lot of martial artists, famous martial artists, are actually Christian. I was like, wow. And I never knew that. Like, I was like, wow. Like, I actually attended a martial artist convention, and it was Christian. And I was like, and that all these famous martial artists, legends, were Christian. I was like, wow, amazing. I never knew about that. But Raul Reese is definitely a martial artist. I think he's into kung fu, stuff like that. And so definitely much respect to kung fu, man. It's like, those are good self defense arts. But yeah, that was just basically my experience, with Calvary chapels, and you know, but this film just goes into the history of it, and it starts off with Chuck Smith, and then some charismatic leader in that whole Calvary Chapel movement. It started off with the hippies during like the 70s, I think, or 60s or 70s, one of those. And back then, the churches were very conservative, right? Very, oh, we got to be all formal, right? And Chuck Smith kind of came from that background. And so he comes across a guy named Lonnie, who was a hippie, right? And like a lot of hippies out here, they explore, they're all into, drugs and the new age, and dabbling in all these different religions and everything. So like in the film, it basically, it's like Lonnie, he he came across Jesus and everything, and and I guess he gave his life to Jesus, and as a hippie, he turned his life around. The whole hippie lifestyle was very, very promiscuous, all into drugs and everything, and so he turned his life around, and started following the Jesus way, and so this guy Lonnie came across Chuck Smith, and Chuck Smith eventually started seeing how God was using Lonnie in reaching out to the hippies, and so Chuck Smith allowed Lonnie to become like a leader in his church, and so the very conservative members didn't want all the hippies to join the church, and because they're very conservative, right? But Chuck Smith just went along and went along with the Lonnie and the hippies that turned to Christianity to start following Jesus, and there was like a big movement, a big movement that the Chuck Smith and Lonnie and them, like, they started evangelizing in some sense, and a lot of hippies were turning to Christ, and and getting off drugs, and their unhealthy lifestyles, um, and so that's where the movement started, you could see that this guy named Lonnie was kind of like a charismatic, type person, where he wasn't very religious, like, you know he was just going along with what God would tell him to do. So he would lay hands on people and pray over them. He would prophesy over people. And many people have said that, there's times where, he prophesied over people, and it came out to be true. He even prophesied over a guy named Greg Laurie. He would be ministering to a lot of people, and it came out to be true. And Greg Laurie he wasn't even a minister at that time. He just encountered Lonnie, and actually he was all Greg Laurie was all drugged up, and he was getting involved in the hippie movement, and he came across Lonnie, and Lonnie just prophesied over him and told him that he was gonna minister to a lot of people, and the prophecy came out true that Greg Laurie ended up becoming one of Calvary Chapel's. He branched off to was called Harvest, and he created he established a big old ministry, to this very day, and so that's interesting with this Lonnie character. But then it goes into the reality of what happened. Chuck Smith was, I guess, he was very conservative at times, and a lot of his members who were conservative were like saying, "Hey, if you don't kick these hippies out, like, we're not gonna fund you anymore." Stuff like that was happening. So Chuck Smith was kind of being pressured, like, to basically release Lonnie and a lot of the hippies, right? And so what happened is, I guess Lonnie got tired. He got tired of Chuck Smith, and he basically he left Calvary Chapel, and from there, Chuck Smith, was basically, I guess he was trying to grow the ministry, but it seemed like Lonnie was the charismatic figure that was evangelizing to a lot of the hippies, and um, so I guess what happened is it wasn't expanding as much as it would have under Lonnie. So when Greg Laurie actually took over, actually branched off to Harvest and everything, that started growing a lot right there, and that's what that's the history of it right there. That what happened, and so the film, it just kind of shows you that how God uses outsiders, right? And in particular, the hippies, and you kind of see the clash between religion, kind of like the Pharisees and religion, versus those who just follow Christ, and let God lead them, And so you see that clash, and you still see this happening in the churches to this very day. You have this cessationist thinking out here that tries to limit the movement of God out here. And they put all these rules and legalism and restrictions. It's almost like the Pharisees, if you actually think about it. It's almost like the Pharisees. um, the religious people who are always trying to stop the movement of God, right? Even back in Jesus' time, you saw Jesus just, healing the sick, casting out demons, doing all kinds of miracles. And the religious figures didn't like that, right? The Pharisees didn't like that. They were trying to put a stop to that, right? Same thing is happening in this modern day churches out here. And I'm not calling Chuck Smith a Pharisee. He was actually a good teacher, so it's just I guess he was probably being pressured, and he wasn't really used to kind of like the flow of God, in some sense, the supernatural aspect of ministry and everything. So, but um, but yeah, I mean, Lonnie was kind of like a controversial figure. He did. What I actually heard a interview by Greg Laurie, and he was saying, yeah, when Lonnie left the church, he backslid, but then he came back and reconciled, and and he passed away. But and it's interesting. Is like it shows the reality of the Christian life. A lot. You know, everyone's not perfect, right? Everyone struggles with sin, right? With the flesh, right? And sometimes people fall away. They fall away from the church. They backslide, right? But then it's the key is to bounce back. Bounce back and come back to God. The prodigal son, right? And it's like never give up. Never give up. Always remember your first love. Remember God. And He has mercy, right, on all of us. So, but it's important to turn from sin, because sin can lead you to destruction. The what's it, the wages of sin is death, right? But the gift of God is eternal life, right? So a lot of people sometimes, people enjoy their sin, but they don't realize that the sin that they enjoy may lead them to destruction, self-destruction, bad habits, stuff like that, having an unhealthy lifestyle and everything. So, um, but everyone has their weaknesses out. Even Paul says that he struggled in his flesh, and that's just what being part of being human is, struggling. But that's why we gotta, in a sense, always check ourselves, and examine ourselves, and put our flesh in check, and put on Christ and renew our mind, right? And definitely, but the film was pretty good. I liked how it went to the history of the Calvary chapels, and it also it gave a realistic picture of what happened, and what happens, so it's and speaking of I it mentioned something about it was just a little quick I know a little quick what do you call it, it covered Catherine Coleman a little bit, and so she was involved with the hippies as well and everything. Back then, the hippie movement was big, and a lot of times people think hippies were mostly whites, right? Mostly middle class or well-to-do white people. And it's true. A lot of hippies were a lot of like whites who were trying to be Native American, and they started getting into the new age and into the drugs. And they even said there's a whole thing about the whole hippie movement. Was some say it was even like a government experiment, where they were trying to experiment on the population to get them on LSD, and they would have this see how the population would react to this and everything. There's even some people who said Timothy Leary was working for the government and everything. Who he was a hippie guru at that time. So that gets even deep right there, like the whole hippie movement and how they were involved in drugs. So if you guys are aware of like there's information that there was more to the hippie movement than we actually know about, right? Like people just think, oh, it's just drugs and having promiscuous lifestyle, but they said they tried using the hippie movement to break down society, right? To break down the family structure, to get people to test drugs on people, right? LSD was used as kind of like they were experimenting on it to see like if they can actually use that as mind control, you know. So I wouldn't doubt that that was occurring with this whole hippie movement. But there's even Mexicans who were involved in the hippie movement. So that's why it's like, okay, this I can actually relate this to even like some brown, type theology in some sense, or because there was brown hippies too, Mexican hippies out here in California who were involved in that. I mean, Santana was one of them. He performed at Woodstock or something like that. And even Santana, interesting about him is that he's even Christian. I never even knew about that. Like, um, I never knew Santana was Christian. I was like, wow, interesting. But yeah, it's just the hippie movement. It's like they were outsiders. They were young. They were a lot of times we had these trendy movements out here, and it's unfortunate that a lot of the young generations they end up going into self-destructive trends and drugs and you know alcohol and just different things, and this happens a lot pretty much in every generation. But to me, the film is not just all about hippies, though. It's kind of sending a message that, hey, outsiders, people who are rejected and despised, right? Drug addicts, alcoholics, people who had a criminal lifestyle, or people who grew up in unfortunate circumstances, and the poor, and this different people who've been rejected in society. God can reach out to them and change their lives, for the better, and God can lead those kind of movements, and God He loves the rejected, right? The downtrodden, a lot of times these high class, rich, conservative people. A lot of time God doesn't work through them because they're so religious minded, and a lot of times God He moves, where people who are open to Him, who are willing, willing vessels, and that's what happened, at that time. Is that these hippies right here were open. And I would think that a lot of times the hippies they get into spirituality, right? They start getting into the New Age, the Native American stuff, Carlos Castaneda, and all that. They start getting into all this hippie New Age spirituality. But what happens is when they tune into Jesus, the Jesus way, the spirituality of Jesus, then that's boom, that's like that a powerful movement occurs, and I kind of like to talk about, I usually emphasize this is like even when psychics and warlocks and witches and all that, when they turn to Christ, they know about the spiritual realm. They know about the evil spiritual realm, and they're well aware of that, right? But then when they turn to Christ, they tap into the supernatural power of God, and they start working for God. And whereas the religious people who grew up in this cessationist thinking, this enlightenment thinking, where they deny spirituality, or they say, oh, everything's strictly material, or they have this mindset is everything's satanic, you can't be spiritual at all, and this and that. It's this, or the gifts of God are no longer needed. This cessationist thinking is very limiting. It's very limiting, and it's just like the Pharisees, like the religious people who were trying to limit God, trying to limit Jesus. And we got to be aware of that. Now, I have a book where Chuck Smith, he makes some good points. It's called Charismania or Charismatic, something like that. Charisma and Charismania, something like that. And he kind of explains what his approach was, and what he saw was two extremes that he didn't agree with. He saw one was like, I think he changed over time, right? He changed, and he started opening up to the charismatics, approaches. He was involved with Catherine Coleman, um, and so I think what he kind of criticized in the book the two extremes, where you had one extreme that was like, how he used to be, very conservative, where, oh, everything has to be proper protocol, and almost like a cessationist, where like it's like, okay, the gifts of God are, is like less emphasized, or it ceased during Bible times, but and their emphasis is more on teaching, right? And then he saw the other extreme, where you had the charismatics who were free flowing. They were own to miracles and supernatural and prophesying, speaking in tongues and stuff like that. And but sometimes it can get out of hand at times, where it gets too extreme, right? Where it's not balanced with good, doctrine in some sense. And I'm not talking about Calvinist doctrine, because a lot of times when people say, oh, you got to have the correct doctrine, proper doctrine, or usually it means Calvinism. And that's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm saying is you should be guided by the teachings of Christ, by God and everything. And sometimes the charismatics and Pentecostals can get out of hand, where in this day and age, sometimes I see stuff that's questionable, where you see people who are claiming that there's, angel feathers flying from the roof everywhere, and gold dust, and supposedly oil coming out of the Bible and stuff like that. And there's actually been people who've exposed some of the churches that start promoting this gold dust type stuff, saying, wait a minute, they're throwing gold dust through the ventilators and stuff like that, so you have to be careful with what they call with charlatans, who are just trying to get famous, and trying to make money off the congregation. And sometimes some of these televangelists come out and start faking healings and stuff like that. But like I said, like even Dr. Brown says, you know, as a kind of like as a Pentecostal, or someone charismatic, like we have to have a balance, like we got to be careful of the charlatans and the phony strange fire, right? But then he talks about there's authentic fire. So God does do miracles, and there are demons being cast out of people. God still works to this very day, the same way he instructed us, especially in the Great Commission, to go and cast out demons, go over there and pray over the sick. And um, different things like that. It's being a Christian is not about head knowledge and just doctrine, right? It's also living a spiritual life. It's a supernatural life as well. So this film, if you ever get a chance, go see it. It's called Jesus Revolution. It's pretty cool. Um, it's it just says that God can work in different subcultures out here, different people out here, and I seen it. I mean, I've been involved in different ministries where ex gang members turn their whole life around, miraculously, ex drug addicts, right? Ex drunks, right? Ex prostitutes, ex, is the worst of the worst in society, right? They just turned their life around, when, because they were open to the gospel, right? And it's just God, it just, changes them, changes their life, so that's miraculous right there. And I've seen some of these guys that, don't even have a seminary degree, don't have a theology degree, and they're being used more powerfully than some of these guys with all these THDs and, seminary, degrees. I've seen some of these guys that don't even have like, big time education in theology, and where they're just open to God, and and they're just working in the supernatural power of God. Man, you see miracles happening. You see people being, demons cast out of them, and different things like that. So, if you actually think about Jesus, when Jesus picked the disciples, he wasn't saying, "Oh, no, 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 you're not qualified, right? Oh, you're not good enough person, right? Oh, wait a minute, you don't have a theology degree, right? Or oh, oh, you don't hold to this doctrine, right? No, Jesus, he used anyone who was willing. He said, "Come, follow me." That's what he told. He told the tax collector, right? A lot of people hated the tax collectors back in the Roman times, right? He called the tax collectors, he called, uh, the prostitutes. There was just a lot of people just following Christ, man. And everywhere he went, he impacted their life, and they supernaturally were transformed, and then he gave us the Great Commission. If you're a follower of Christ, and you go out and spread the good news. Go, do what Jesus was doing in some sense. Although, um, Jesus I see as a standard. Jesus is like, wow, man. Like, if you really read about his miracles and everything, raising the dead. uh, um, I've heard of some stories of people being raised from the dead, and I haven't witnessed it, but I see it as a possibility. I don't limit God, right? I don't limit God. God can do anything He wants, right? And you just have to be a willing vessel, right? And God can work through you. If you have the Holy Spirit in you, God can work through you. You know, you'll be surprised. I mean, there's been times where I was surprised, and I don't give credit to me whatsoever. I'm just a regular human being out here. But the key is you got to be open to God. And when God tells you to do something, just act upon it. Just act upon it right away. Don't even doubt Him. And I know it's that free flow, and that's what that Lonnie guy, a lot of the cessationists criticize him as, oh, this guy backslid and he went back to his, corrupt lifestyle. But he came back. He came back to God as a prodigal son, towards the end of his life, so it's just the problem with these cessationists is they try to look for sin in everyone to dismiss the charismatic and Pentecostal movements, as though they don't sin, So, but yeah, God can use anybody. Believe me, He can use anybody. You just got to be open and willing, you know. And God, he wants you to be real with him, you know, from the heart, right? You know, and a lot of times it's deep prayer, man. Getting in deep prayer, you know, it's like, and sometimes these cessationists criticize speaking in tongues, right? And they could be extreme. Some Pentecostals said, "Oh, you need to speak in tongues in order to be saved." Well, that's not correct. You know, you could be saved when, you know, and people don't necessarily have to speak in tongues, but it's recommended that you speak in tongues, you know, and speaking in tongues, the Bible talks about that, you know. And Paul talks about it's better to love than to, you know, than to like speak in tongues or prophesy and stuff like that. And that's true. But Paul was not dismissing those gifts, you know. He was just telling people you need to have love, especially when you function in those gifts, you know. Um, the gifts that God gives you, right? And every Christian has the potential, you know, to to have those gifts of God, you know. And from my experience, speaking in tongues, I've actually been taught by a guy named a famous minister, Pastor Chris Oyekilome, on speaking in tongues. And speaking in tongues, it charges you up. It stirs up the power of God in you. And you know, one time, you know, I allowed myself to be used by God, where you know I was involved in I went to an event where they were praying over people, and and I got prayed over because I was like seeking prayer, and then I was walking out the door. God told me to go back and go and join that prayer group because they were laying hands on people, right, and praying over them. So I just followed the voice of God. It's like God sends you like kind of like I like information or thoughts or something like that to do something, right? And it's not negative. So you have to have discernment, you know. Sometimes the devil will send some negative thoughts to you. So don't act upon that, right? All good things come from God, and and that's what the scripture says, right? So God just told me to go back and join that prayer group and pray over people. And to my surprise, I at first nothing was happening, right? But then eventually, like I prayed over someone, and bam, like the power of God, just like I felt like electricity, like coming through my hands and my whole body, right? And the person was just fell under the power of God, like limp, like went down, was shaking. It kept shaking, right? And it wasn't fake, because I know when people fake stuff, right? I was trained in skepticism, right? But this person wasn't even like even preparing for it or anything. It just went for prayer right away, and as soon as I laid hands on that person, boom, they went limp, right? And I was like, oh, like I just went along with it, like, and this person was just like kind of like convulsing, like under the power of God, and the body was like stiff, like a log, kind of like rigor mortis, right? But shaking under the power of God, and I felt like this electricity going through my hand, and I felt the power of God. Like you could feel it, like the power of God just going up and down in your body, and like electricity. And I was just like, okay, I'm just flowing. Like, don't even question anything. Don't none of that. Like, you got to get that carnal mindset out of the way. and and so whenever someone falls under the power of God, like we kind of have to act as ushers, whoever's next to the person. So one guy was on the other side, and I was on the other side. We had to lift them up, right? And as I was trying to lift this person on one side up, the body was just like a log, just shaking. And this person was, usually a leg, like kind of like falls down or something, or the arm, but the body was just stiff and shaking, right? And but then eventually, like, we got the person up, and they went, they were no longer a log, and they started, like, they got up, and I felt electricity. It was just powerful, man. And I talk to this very day. I always mention that experience, and it's just yielding. They say yielding to the Spirit, you know, just yielding to the Holy Spirit, and sometimes God will tell you to do something, to go do it, and you just act upon it. Don't even like just go along. If it's godly, just go along and do it. Um, and there was another time where God gave me some message like to tell someone right in front of me, and I went and just relayed that information. And this person says, "Oh, how did you even know about that?" And I was like, "Oh, God told me." I just went and like shared that information to that person, and and it's not me, it's all God, man. God is the one that tells um but yeah, it's just God. You just got to yield to God and open up to God, and sometimes God will tell you to do something, and I kind of like the whole Catherine Coleman mindset. She knew about that, right? Well, see, okay, with her ministry, this guy named Brother Mike says he was involved in her ministry. He says like not everyone would get healed. Some of them would, and some would. So you always had that dichotomy right there, right? And it happened even when Jesus times, right? Sometimes Jesus was healing everyone, who came along his pathway, right? But there's times where he couldn't heal somebody because they had doubt, right? That's what happened. So sometimes people in the congregation won't have faith, and they'll be full of doubt. So this is one of the explanations why some people just don't get healed, and some people do get healed because they have faith and they yield to God, and they just let that carnal mindset go, and they just yield to God, and they get the doubt out, right? And just open up to God, and they receive their healing, and they walk and act upon it, right? They activate their faith, right? Sometimes it happens right there on the spot, or it happens like in a process. It takes time, right? So, and definitely, man. But the power of God's real, man. It's guys should take this seriously, man. I wouldn't be here talking about that, like it's the power of God that kept me into following Christ. Early on, I've actually participated in one of my family members who was possessed, and we cast that demon out of this family member. And that experience just showed me the supernatural world right there. You saw the devil in action, but then you saw Jesus, who had more authority and casting that demon out. So that reality is real. Exorcisms, the power of Jesus, the authority of Jesus, real. People say Jesus is not real. That's nonsense. When you experience an exorcism, you see how Jesus is real, and you'll see even the devil how he's real as well too. The demons, right? But Jesus is more powerful. So the supernatural power of God is real, and speaking in tongues, speaking in tongues. People talk. I don't see that in the church that much anymore, right? And a lot of cessationists say, oh, the Pentecostals are always saying, oh, speaking in tongues is required for salvation. That's not always true. I'm a Pentecostal, and I say that being saved is like speaking in tongues is not a requirement being saved, but it's preferred that you actually do it. I mean, God, can work. I mean, you know, um, if you speak in tongues, let me tell you that Pastor Chris Oyekilome gave me some insight on this training where he talked about speaking in tongues charges you up. It's the power of God, right? It stirs you up, right? That's why some ministers they start speaking in tongues right before they lay hands on people, and people fall under the power of God. Sometimes they get healed, or sometimes demons are cast out of people. It's the power of God, it's just yielding to God. But it's religion that tells you, it's cessationist theology that tells you, oh no, you the spiritual gifts only needed during biblical times. That's just nonsense. It's just a bunch of nonsense. but anyways, but yeah, that film Jesus Revolution is very interesting. It talks about the history of the Calvary chapels. It shows the clash between conservative religious, thinking versus people who are just open to God and willing to allow God to use them, and in a mighty way, and reach out to other people, and minister to them, and a lot of times people even talks about even like me, I'm an urban apologist, right? A Chicano urban apologist, and you got to relate to people, it's like if you're just always with a suit, and stuck in your ivory church, right, or your theological seminary, like, and you're not out there ministering to people, you're not relating to people, they're not going to come, they're not going to be open to the gospel, right? They're not going to come to your church or whatever, or your group, or your circle, or whatever, so you got to relate, and the film was just showing how Jesus used the hippie to reach out to other hippies who were hooked on drugs and having an unhealthy lifestyle, and there was people who came to Christ and followed Christ and changed their lives, and it's like, this is like you got to relate to people out here, that's why some ministries are really good at that, some evangelist type ministries, you see them. I've been involved in some Chicano churches where they have former gang members, right? Former people who are in subcultures, right? I remember starting off in. I used to be in this church where there was rockers, punk rockers, there were break dancers or poppers, there were ex gang members, cholos, ex drug addicts, ex drugs dealers, ex prisoners, ex prostitutes, um, and it's just typical working class people too, just regular people, you just got to relate to people out there, you can't think you're Mr. Pharisee, right? Mr. Pharisee, like, okay, everybody's satanic, and you know, I can't, I can't deal with these type of people. And the film is very interesting because you see the conservatives there, and I'm not promoting liberalism either, there's what I'm saying is that you have this mindset in the church where they just want to be safe, and the film talks about that. Like, they don't want to reach out to the outcast, the homeless, the rejected, the despised, right? The orphans and all that. At times they just want to live comfortably and collect their money, right? And it's like it's that's not what Jesus was actually doing. Jesus was reaching out to everybody, man. Everyone that came across his path, he didn't say, "Oh no, you're not good enough, right? Or you're not qualified enough, right? Or you gotta have money, right? You gotta be successful, right? To be, to come follow me, right? You gotta be rich." No, Jesus actually even told the rich, "Hey, you know what? Give everything that you have and come follow me." And sometimes the rich didn't like that. They didn't want to give up their wealth and riches because they valued that more than God. And this is the materialistic mindset out here, and the materialistic mindset even has affected the church. And a lot of times in these modern day churches out here, they're very they're kind of like religious Pharisees. The Bible talks about that. They have a form of religion, but they lack the power, right? And if you guys just came in, go check out that movie called Jesus Revolution. It's about the Calvary Chapel history and everything, and it gives some insight. Even what churches are actually going through to this very day. dealing with this whole cessationist theology, right? This whole thing. Oh, you can't be speaking in tongues, or you can't be prophesying. You can't be laying hands on the people for healings and all that. And it's just this attitude. It just restricts a lot of Christians. God can use anyone powerfully and mighty. You just got to yield to God. Anyways, but if you guys get a chance, go check it out. Jesus Revolution. Um, and even with it now, it's like some of the Calvary chapels, because I've been to some of them recently, and if you see how they were involved in the charismatic movement, especially with Catherine Coleman and all that, but they kind of went off, and they're I don't see them. A lot of them were they I don't see a lot of them speaking in tongues, so I think they're still kind of like following that approach, that mindset. I think if they would allow speaking in tongues again and get people more involved in that, I think God will. They'll you'll start seeing more um, the power of God being in those churches. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Calvary chapels, they're good at teachings. They're good at the teaching approach, and it's exactly what Chuck Smith was all about, right? But Lonnie in the movie was more like Pentecostal, charismatic, and he just yielded to God, and and that's the key. You got to have a balance. Yeah, you got to have teachings and all that, and wisdom, right? But you also have to you got to yield to God and His supernatural power too. Um, but yeah. Anyways, go and check it out. I just saw it yesterday. This is kind of like a little review on this Jesus Revolution. But anyways, let me see if I can actually and reply to some comments. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me some questions. Anyways, and let's see here. Um, let's see here. So casual conversation, cool. You said I've seen the trailer. I like to watch it. Yeah, yeah, go check it out. It's in movies right now, selected theaters. Jesus Revolution. It's very interesting. I even relate it to even like not just the hippie movement, but even other like subcultures out here. You have a bunch of different subcultures, especially in the inner cities, and that's where urban apologetics, it relates to those people. You got people from different backgrounds. Even Paul says, I became one of them that so that they can be saved. It's like it's relating to people. A lot of times people don't want to hear you. Like if you're a preppy guy that has been, you grew up rich and everything, someone coming from a background where they aren't rich and they've been in different lifestyles and everything, and that's not so preppy. If you were like a biker, or if you're like a ex cholo, or you're a tagger or something, or a rap, or you're into hip hop and all, a lot of times you don't want to hear these preppy guys. You're like, you don't want to hear them. But if you have someone from those particular cultures, and like for example, Set Free Ministries that I've been involved in, um, a lot of them still dress up like bikers. And what happens is bikers see that and like, oh, they relate to that, and you'll be surprised. A lot of bikers end up, turning to Christ because of that. Because they can relate to that, right? If there's like someone ministering who has like a hip hop background, right, or rocker background, or former drug addict, or whatever, it's like people relate to that, and they see how God has changed people, and they're not all dressing up all preppy, and you know, like some of these churches out here, even some of these Spanish ministries, sometimes they get out of hand too. Like they they make the women wear long skirts, and they're I don't know, they kind of look like what is it what are they called? I forgot their names. I'm just trying to remember. Amish. They, and not to talk bad about the Amish. The Amish had their approaches. They have their everyone in the body of Christ has their gifts and uniqueness, and you know um, their gifts. Yeah, their gifts that God has given them. But sometimes these Spanish ministries that get into Pentecostalism, they're kind of legalistic in some sense, where they make the women wear long dresses, and it looks like they're trying to dress like kind of like the Little House of the Prairie in some sense. So it's that kind of thinking, that it's just I'm not too sure. It's like you got to be careful with that legalism, that kind of stuff. But definitely go check out that trailer. It's I mean, go check out that movie. It's pretty good. Check it out to get some good insight about it. Let's see. Another comment. I've attended charismatic retreats, and you really feel the power. Yeah, definitely. Growing up, Protestants, a lot of Protestants are very critical of Catholics, and but I say the Pentecostals and the Charismatics, like the Pentecostals actually influenced the Charismatic movement in the Catholic Church, and Catherine Coleman was actually, she bridged the gap, like you know. Uh, there was Catholics involved in, Catherine Coleman's ministry, and there was Catholics who were opening up to the power of God, the power of Jesus, and there was even a charismatic movement in the Catholic Church. Um, and so, like the way I am is, I'm there's some things that I don't agree with in the Catholic Church, certain approaches, certain approaches I don't agree with, and it's probably influenced by my Protestantism as well as the Bible, but I'm not the type of Pentecostal or Protestant that says that, I'm not the type that says Catholics are not saved. I don't agree with that. I do believe that Catholics, there's some Catholics who know Christ, who know God, and just like Protestants, like there's Protestants that go to church and they just do it because of tradition, and they don't know God. They don't tap into the supernatural life of Christ. And some of them grew up in the church and they leave the church, right? And they don't come back at times. And so I believe it all depends on the individual in some sense. It's like growing up in the church and traditionalism doesn't mean that you're saved, right? So, but I do believe that there's some Protestants, some Catholics, and some non-denominationals who are saved and follow Christ, and know God sincerely from the heart. But there was actually, yeah, there's been a movement of charismatics in the Catholic Church, and God can use anybody, just like He used the hippies, right? um, and it's just not the Pentecostals too. There was Catholics, Presbyterians, um, Calvinists, who opened up to the power of God, and they weren't restricted by their religious traditions and thinking, and they opened up to God's supernatural power, the reality of God, which is a supernatural life, and they experienced the power of God. And some of them even talk about their experiences and have their testimonies. Um, so let's see here. Um, let's see, another comment. Let's see. I was able to receive the speaking in tongues gift, and it was so powerful. Yeah. So sometimes people think it's a particular gift, right? And some, they read the scripture and says, "Oh, some are gifted with the gift of prophecy and teaching and speaking in tongues." Um, but and there's different types of tongues, right? Some require interpretation, some are just personal, right? Where you're in your own house, in your own, room or closet, and just talking to God. I even say, there's different. I think the way I think is there's different levels of speaking in tongues. So sometimes, it's like you got to be careful. Like some cessationists say, "Oh, all that's fake, right? It doesn't work and all that." And these cessationists, they need to be careful. And when because they're trying to criticize God, right? But there's times where people are in the flesh and they're speaking in tongues, and it's what I call it's in the flesh. But the way I think is that when you first initiate speaking in tongues and then you really get into it, and you're like really like, you know, you're like talking to God eventually. There's kind of like a level of tongues. You first initiate it and you're just normal, right? You're just trying to get into it. But the more you do it, the longer in some sense. And there's no formula, right? I'm not teaching formulas because God doesn't work like that. God can work any way He wants, right? There's preachers out here say, "Oh, you got to do this and that and this and that for you to experience the supernatural power of God." God works however He wants. He looks at your heart. That's what it is, and you're willing to open to Him. But from my experience, speaking in tongues, yeah, you're first trying to get out of the flesh, the carnal mindset, and you start closing your eyes. You can even open your eyes. There's no formula, and you start praying and speaking in tongues. All of a sudden, you start feeling the power of God. You start feeling a charge. You start feeling like electricity or a tingling going up and down your spine, and then and sometimes like the tongues get so deep, like it's no longer you, it's like God like speaking through you. And I actually had this experience one time. It was powerful. i was in, I was involved in a Pentecostal church where we had prayer night, right? And we would all get in a room and start praying, right? And there's times where we would shut the lights off and keep praying, and we're all speaking in tongues, right? And these are old school Pentecostal. We used to do this a lot in a lot of old school Pentecostal churches. That I don't think they do this anymore, but I miss actually those kind of prayer meetings where we would just speak in tongues and pray, like just shut off the lights so we won't be distracted, right? A lot of times we're so distracted what we see and everything, so we try to cut off all the distractions, just tune into God and speak in tongues, right? And one time I was speaking in tongues, and all of a sudden I just felt the power of God just boom hit me, like it's indescribable, indescribable. And what happened is like the level of tongues, like it's just God just took over, like, and I felt like a sword coming out of my mouth, and it was just like it wasn't even me in some sense. It was God like speaking through me, like it was powerful. It was powerful, and when that was actually a unique experience. It didn't happen all the time. It's like that was like probably and even like everyone around me, I think they kind of sensed because it was dark, right? But you could still see there was like little light coming through the window, and even the pastor who was known to function in the supernatural power of God. He would cast out demons, speak in tongues. He was even like shocked. He saw what was happening. He was just like, and I was a kid back. I was like a preteen back then, and he saw what was happening, and I learned this, from like, even like I started doing this, like even like while worshiping God, like people will have all their music and worship God, and instead of, I would just speak in tongues and just close my eyes. It's kind of like it's just, you're just praying to God and speaking in tongues, and you start feeling His presence. You start getting charged with the power of God, and it hits you so powerfully, like you feel this power, just the presence of God, and sometimes it just makes you cry. You feel this joy, this happiness, you feel this peace, and it makes you even cry. And the way I am is, I'm not into being a crybaby, right? As a guy, we're not into that kind of stuff, right? But man, when God takes over, it's just God, he's just the love of God just takes over, and you just cry, you start crying. And so, yeah, there's different experiences that occurs, on when you speak in tongues. And there's times where I'm just in my room and I'm speaking in tongues, and I feel the power of God just charged up in me. It's just, wow, this is powerful, like, and it's God's presence. So definitely, and a lot of people, they strayed away from this, and it's because of that cessationist mindset, and they don't want to allow this in churches anymore. I know a church that still does that though is Pastor Chris's Oyekilome's, what's it, Christ Embassy churches. They still speak in tongues, and they still actually preserve a lot of that old school Pentecostalism. That's why sometimes I still go to their churches on and off, and um, and their whole ministry is, involves a lot of the supernatural healing and stuff like that. Although I don't see a lot of prophecy in their churches, but maybe they need to get more, you know, involved with prophetic ministry and stuff like that. But there's been other ministries I've been involved in that function more in prophetic ministry. So, um, but yeah, every church has their own approach in some sense, their own gift. Um, and God blesses everyone with certain gifts as well. But speaking in tongues is it. I the way I see it is that if you're saved and you have the Holy Spirit, you know, um, a lot of times, people have this mindset. Oh, they they say that, oh, only certain people can speak in tongues, right? Only certain people have that gift, and that's not true. Like, if you have the Holy Spirit and you're saved, God can use you powerfully. You just gotta try it and yield to God. Try it out. Just get in your room, worshiping God, start speaking in tongues, close your eyes, be true, from the heart. Worship God with, in spirit and truth, and speak in tongues, and keep doing it, and don't let nothing distract you, you know. Just shut everything, like tune out of everything out, and be connected with God, and boom, you're gonna see the presence of God. Just, you're gonna feel the presence of God, and the presence of God is gonna come into your room. And there's been times where, I was praying to God, and I just saw what's called a glory cloud inside the room. And it was just me there, and you could just see, like, it's like light and like a glory cloud. Like, it just appears, and you feel the presence of God. You feel the peace, and like, there's times where I would get in prayer, and then all of a sudden I start just looking to the sky, and praising God, loving God, and boom, you get that. He gives you a little taste of His presence, because He's powerful, man. God is powerful. Um. So, anyways, let's see. Let's move on to the next comment. Let's see here. Yeah, yeah, okay. I'm glad you experienced that casual conversation. You said after these experiences, there's no way you can deny the power of God. Exactly, exactly. That's why I emphasize experience. Like in philosophy, man, they brainwash you. I remember taking philosophy of religion, and they say, "Oh no, personal experience is not a good reason to believe in God." Says who? Says who? Says the skeptic? Says the carnal mind? Says the atheist? Come on. Personal experience is very important to know who God is. Experience in general, right? And they try to limit experience to just the five senses, to the material realm. No, there's everything's in some sense is spiritual, right? Humans are spiritual. We're spirit beings in some sense. We have a soul, right? You got to break all that Western Enlightenment thinking and experience. Supernatural experiences are real, and the power of God is real, and there's evidence of that. Just by people around the world throughout history who have experienced the power of God, experienced miracles. You actually see demons being cast out of people. That's the power of God right there, touching the life of a possessed person. Those demons are coming out, manifesting, right? And they're delivered, right? That's just evidence that God is real, right? God's supernatural power is real. And once you experience the power of God, you will always remember that, right? You will always remember that. If you stray off as a prodigal son, you end up backsliding, you end up going into the world, you'll still remember that. You experience, your experience with God. And but if you're truly, one of his, you'll come back. You'll come back from all that. And hopefully you come back before Satan tries to, lead you to destruction, right? But the supernatural power of God is so real, and you can access God anywhere you want. It don't even have to be at a temple, right? It could be anywhere. You could be at a park, you could be in your room, you could be anywhere, outside or indoors or outdoors, anywhere. Just even think of God and just love God and thank him for everything and talk to God, speak to God. And sometimes you won't. Sometimes people think God's gonna speak to you where you can really hear, like I'm talking to you right now. Well, God functions supernaturally, right? And so a lot of times God, He'll talk to you, He'll send you, a thought or what's called an impression, right? Right? He'll send you a message, and you'll know it when it happens, right? And some people say it's like, oh, I know that I know, right? It's like God sends you, He talks to you. One time, God, He even talks to you in dreams. And I've had God talk to me in my dreams. So dreams, the Western world tells you, oh, dreams are just dreams, right? It's like they don't take that seriously, right? But we're spirit beings, and dreams is basically it's the spirit realm, right? And that's why sometimes demons try to torment people through their nightmares, right? But then dreams, God can speak to you through dreams, visions, dreams, and all that. The whole prophetic ministry too is devalued in these days, but people definitely gotta yield to God and His, and yield to the Spirit, and not restrict God, like typical cessationist religion out here. Um, and so let's see here. Okay, so I guess I'm gonna end it here. It's good. Um, good talking to you all. It's good discussion. Go check out that film, Jesus Revolution. Um, Pretty interesting insight into the Calvary Chapel history and the churches and everything. Um, and remember, God can use you. Don't matter who you are, where you come from, just yield to his spirit and also get the word of God in you, read the Bible, read about Jesus and his words, his wisdom, read about, the supernatural life of God, Don't let these religious Pharisees restrict you with their false theologies, you know. Anyways, I guess I'm gonna let you guys go, and don't forget to click on my Rumble account and check it out. I just uploaded there's like two or three videos. Go check it out. Go click on my link below. Subscribe and like. Also, send me an Instagram message if you want. If you want to contact me, click on my links below, and join my Twitter space, Twitter account. Add me on Twitter so you can join my uncensored conscious chats at on Twitter Space, and I expose a lot of stuff there, uncensored information, truth. But anyways, I'll let you guys go. You guys have a good day, and remember, don't be woke, be conscious. See you guys later.